We're going to continue the theme of what does it mean to eat with people in a way that actually changes things. This is the fourth message in this series as we explore what it means to bless. What does it mean to actually be a source of hope in your family or in your community or in your workplace? Bless really is as we unpack it, like a 5-point plan to make a difference in your community. I want to say you won't find the sermon notes for the first time ever. You won't find them on the YouVersion Bible app. Today, you'll find them on our webpage. And the sermon notes you'll find if you go to on our webpage, citywidehobart.org.au, you can go type in /sermons and it'll take you straight there. And from now on, our sermon notes will appear there, along with this afternoon the video of the sermon, and the audio from the sermon will also be there. And you can pick up on the videos from the last few weeks. And if you just go to the webpage as normal, you can just go to the menu that says Connect, and at the top of that it says Sermons. So if you click on they call it the little hamburger, the three lines that are next to each other on your phone, and that click on that, it opens a menu and it takes you to the sermon notes. Now, one of the things I find interesting, because I love good ideas. I was told this week that I'm an intellectual, and I'm still processing that. I don't think that's true. But I said that to my wife and she said, yeah. I don't know what that means. But I do think it means I do like Jesus' teaching. Like one of the tendencies for me in the Bible is to skip over the stories and get to the teaching bits. But actually, the majority of the Gospels are not so much the teaching bits, but it's the interaction with the people. And in fact, the teaching comes out of the interaction with the people. And one of the things that becomes clear, as we were looking at last week in Matthew chapter 9, the normal way Jesus operates is to sit down and have meals with people. That's the normal way he operates. And so we get this picture of him inviting Matthew to follow him, and then Matthew throws a party. And then the Pharisees come to him and say, your teacher operates weird. He hangs out with people he shouldn't hang out with. And in fact, Jesus later in Matthew in chapter 11 says, John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating or drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. That's Matthew chapter 11. Jesus is saying they are busy critiquing me because I like to sit down and have meals with people. And there's something about the way Jesus sat down to have meals with people that actually ended up changing people's lives. One of the Bible commentators, Donald Hagner, in the Word Biblical Commentary I mentioned last week, it says, it's got to be noted here that table fellowship in that culture at that time was regarded as a very important symbol of the closeness, indeed the oneness of those participating. This is one reason, for example, that Jews were not allowed to sit at the same table with Gentiles. For Jesus and his disciples to be at the same table with tax collectors and sinners implied a full acceptance of them. So part of the reason that Jesus hanging out with people over a meal was profound, he was communicating, I accept you. I'm one with you. I'm not higher than you or lower than you. I accept you. And so it's possible that it's slightly less radical in our culture, but not necessarily dramatically. There is something about sitting down over a meal that it's no longer a power thing. Well, it's not meant to be anyway. You are, as we were talking in the teaching team this week, when you've got a mouthful in your food, there's not a simple way to answer. Have you noticed a simple way to answer a question while you've got your mouth full? It's a bit of an equaliser. There's something about eating a meal together that's a bit of an equaliser, and it's really important. But wouldn't it be true to say that I don't know whether this would be true for you or not, but the majority of meals we have are pretty ordinary and don't change anybody's life. Why did Jesus hanging out with people and sharing meals with people change people's lives in a way that doesn't necessarily happen for us? Well, uh, at the center of what Jesus was doing is communicating two things. And I think for us, the journey is to learn to communicate those same two things, not only when we have meals, but meals are a great opportunity to do it. So we're going to talk about how do you have the kind of meals that actually make a difference, and what can be happening over meals that means they don't have a difference, make a difference, or actually become unhelpful. Because can you bring to mind times where you've had a meal with someone and it's been a bit painful or difficult? Just sharing a meal is no guarantee of something positive happening. I am going to start with two quotes from a man whose one book has had a profound impact on me, and it's not even available on Kindle or anything like that. You've got to buy a paper copy. The man is by the name Henry Nouwen, and the book is called Reaching Out. And he says that there are three movements in the spiritual life. The first movement is the movement from loneliness to solitude. And then the next one is from hostility to hospitality. And so what we're really talking about in this is, what does it mean to be hospitable? And he starts by saying, reaching out to others without being receptive to them is more harmful than helpful. I love, as I heard Dane speak, that Narcotics Anonymous creates a safe space where people can come as they are. Jesus created a safe space where people could come as they are. He welcomed who they really were and didn't say, in order to be near me, you've got to act and talk and sound like this. He says, reaching out to others without being receptive to them is more harmful than helpful and easily leads to manipulation and even to violence in thoughts, words, and actions. Really honest receptivity means inviting the stranger. And here he's talking about, when he talks about strangers, he's talking about people you might have known your whole life, but people you've not known, if you know what I mean. Inviting the stranger into our world on his or her terms, not on ours. When we say, you can be my guest if you believe what I believe, think the way I think, or behave the way I behave, what we're doing is offering love on a condition or a price. That easily leads to exploitation, making hospitality into a business. And one of the great charges against the church in the 20th century is that we turned the church into a business. And we have to, I think, repent of that. And rightly, people have accused the church sometimes of only welcoming people if you think, talk, and act in a particular kind of way. But as we were saying last week, there is a danger of welcoming people in without, and therefore, in order to welcome people in, not being yourself. Nouwen on the same page actually says there's two sides to this business. The second side is confrontation. That real hospitality, to really make a difference in someone's life, you've got to be honest with who you are. And so Jesus doesn't just say to the woman caught in adultery, I love you, everything's okay. You know, he looks into her eyes and says, go and sin no more. He confronts. He stands in the middle of history and says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. He confronts. But he also welcomes. That confrontation is also something we can avoid in the effort to try and keep everybody happy. particularly in a Baptist church where we've got to make decisions together. It can be really awkward to have difficult conversations. Newen says the other side of hospitality, equally important, is confrontation. To be receptive to the stranger in no way implies becoming a neutral nobody. Real receptivity asks for confrontation because space can only be a welcoming space when there are clear boundaries. And boundaries are limits between which we define our own position. Flexible limits, but limits nonetheless. Confrontation results from the articulate presence the presence within boundaries of the host to the guest, by which he offers himself as a point of orientation and a frame of reference. What it's saying is the kind of meal that changes people's lives is a meal where people are welcomed for who they are, but where you are honest with who you are too, and you don't avoid the awkward conversations. Where confrontation and receptivity are two sides. That's why Jesus changed the world. As the Son of God, he came and loved everybody, but also declared he was the Son of God and said that he was the way, the truth, and the life, and he's not just going to fudge it to keep everybody happy. The kind of relationship where you welcome somebody on their own terms, but where you are yourself, is an intimate relationship, where you have moments of intimacy. Intimacy are moments of human connection where you actually, have you had moments where you just look into and all of a sudden you see somebody? We are not saying, as we talk about eating with people, we're not saying you have to spend your whole life in intimacy. You would die of exhaustion very quickly. But all of us need moments where we know we are seen and we see others, and that's what intimacy is. And when you see someone else and you know you are seen, it produces feelings of affection and warmth. It actually changes your experience. We're going to bounce off a book called Born to Win, which is a really unhelpful name, but it's a book that's helped me think about relationships, and particularly the different ways you can have meals with people that are unhelpful and also helpful, and what the difference is. But in that book, the two ladies wrote the book, and they say people can live or work together for many years but never really see or hear each other. Do you believe that's true? Even in a slightly more confronting light, do you think it's possible people can go to the same church for years and never really see or hear each other? Intimacy is that moment where you see or hear someone else. They write, a moment may come where one sees the other for the first time, sees the other's colouring, the other's expressions, the other's many shapes, movements, differences. One may also hear the other for the first time, hear all the other's messages, verbal and non-verbal, emotional and factual. Intimacy requires two people to see each other, and it usually requires one person to be mature enough to start. I think one of the definitions of elders in the New Testament church that Paul has, as he writes to Timothy, and I think we also see in Peter, is the definition of an elder is somebody who's willing to look into the eyes of somebody and love them even though that person doesn't like them. That the person, I think that's what he means by taking up your cross. And so a healthy elder in the church produces intimacy because they see people, even though the majority of time they may not necessarily be seen in return. I think that's part of what the church is meant to be. The church is meant to be an intimate culture where people are seen. And I actually think our culture has shaped us to avoid that. So we want to talk about all the different ways we avoid it and why sometimes eating meals with people may actually be painful and not helpful, and sometimes it may not produce intimacy at all. James and John would say that there are 6 different things you can be doing at any one time in this book. And I find it, look, it was written in the 70s. My daughter will tell me there's better research and all that kind of stuff. But for me, I find these 6 categories helpful in thinking about relationships. Because as a church, we want to really wrestle with what does it mean to live in a way that makes a difference in the real world? What does it mean to, if it's true that we are to give and be ready to give an answer for the hope we have, what does it mean to live in a way that people see that hope? Well, the first way we've already been talking about is intimacy. Intimacy is you can't live in intimacy, but you can spend moments where you see people. And I think one of the tragic things in our culture, I think we are the loneliest culture in the history of the world, where more people are doing life on their own, and that's including in the church. I actually think we've got to find new ways to experience intimacy, to see people and be seen. But as you said, you can't spend your whole life there, but that's I think why Jesus changed the world. Because when he communicated, it was actually him communicating, and he was looking into the eyes of the people he was communicating with. And that's why I love it. It actually says, in your notes there, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, they were fascinated because he communicated as one with authority. I think what they mean by that, his words carried weight because they were really from him. He wasn't making it up. It actually says he wasn't like their teachers of the law who had memorized stuff. He was talking intimately because it was coming from him. So the intimacy. Then we're going to talk in a minute about activities. There's also rituals. There's withdrawing. You can withdraw. There's pastimes. And finally, we're going to talk about psychological games and how they can be really unhelpful, but the thing is we all play them. And so we want to talk about why sometimes meals may not produce intimacy and why sometimes they might. Let's keep going and talk about activities. Activities are things you do where you are involved in engaging with the real world. They're where you are involved in changing something or doing something beyond yourself. In terms of meals, often Italian families have meals that are activities because the whole family gets involved and produces the meal together. In other cultures, it'll be one person who slaves away and does it, and for them the meal's an activity. For everybody else, it's a bonus. So I love one of my favourite memories is in our Poatina house. My daughter creating a mess after watching Master Chef and her mum trying to help her make a croquembouche. Anyone know what a croquembouche is? It's some sort of really fancy kind of dessert thing with toffee. But that moment where you are working with somebody to achieve something, that's an activity. Your work is an activity. We're actually going to talk more about activities next week because I think we're called to change the world, and activities can create an environment where you can build relationship. They can also be an activity, like your workplace can be a space of activity, but within an activity, you can also find yourself playing psychological games or withdrawing or doing these other things as well. But what defines an activity is you are making a difference in the real world, and we are called to make a difference in the real world. We are before sin enters the world, according to the book of Genesis, we are placed in the garden to work it and take care of it. We are placed with work to do. Ephesians says you are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do the good works which he planned in advance for you to do. I really need you to hear this for those of you who think you're retired. In the kingdom of God, there is no such thing. There is just reassignment. And in fact, they now, there's so much data now about what happens when people retire and don't replace one activity for another. It is usual they move to a period of depression or unhealth because we all need purpose. We all need purpose. Uh, I I think the New Testament church knew this. Listen to what Peter says. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain. No, actually, this is that's all. I'll come back to that one. Thessalonians, what I was actually wanting to read. Thessalonians, where it says, this feels a little confronting. I don't think I wouldn't have the courage to say this in church. We hear that some among you are idle and disruptive. They're not busy, they're busybodies. This is actually from the Bible. Such people we command and urge in the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down and earn the food they eat. Well, I love this picture that we are called to be active. We are called to be in activity. But we are also called to step back and have moments of inactivity. In the Old Testament, we hear about the Sabbath, and I think one of the dangers of the Sabbath, it can become a bit like a religious thing. But it is clear that God designed us to rest. And in fact, if we want to follow Jesus, he said, Luke 5 tells us, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Withdrawing is as much a part of the spiritual journey as activity is. Withdrawing can be really healthy. You need moments of solitude, as Henry Nouwen puts it. But one of the dangers can be we live in such a noisy society. We spend so much time with so much noise. We never actually get the kind of solitude we need to actually let the dust settle and work out what's going on internally. But there is also in our society, I think, a norm of unhealthy withdrawal where you can all come to a meal and be looking at your phones, or the dad can be reading the paper, or the TV can be on. And so you might be physically in the same place, but mentally in all different places. There is unhealthy withdrawal, where you withdraw psychologically or even physically to avoid pain rather than honest engagement. And like I said, I can see in myself, it is so tempting sometimes when life is painful, you just flick through your phone and you're nowhere. You're not here, you're not doing anything productive, and you don't get rested. Have you noticed that? Distraction is not rest. And we live in the most distracting society that there is. So we've talked about intimacy, we've talked about activities, and we've talked about withdrawing. They are kind of the big three of the spiritual life. As you typify Jesus, he had intimate relationships. He was active about his Father's business. He was making a difference in the world and calling others to make a difference in the world. But he would also withdraw and have the space with God that he needs. And that's why we talked about you begin in prayer. You don't begin in activity. We're going to talk more about activity next week. There are these other things three other things you need to know about. Rituals are agreed patterns of behaviour that get you through awkward moments in life. So, for instance, and this is where it becomes difficult different families have rituals, different class groups have rituals, different cultures have rituals. Like, for instance, one of the things I learned, because my family, one side of my family is very working class, one side of my family is more middle class. And what I learned is in a middle class family, if they ask you whether you want to stay for a meal, you're meant to say no. Because they don't mean it till they ask you the second time. But in a working class family, if they ask you if you want to stay for a meal and you say no, they'll say, oh, okay, then you can rack off then. And it's a different ritual. Does that make sense? Rituals happen in all kinds of life. Gus and Phil and Josh and I just played a game of golf. Golf is full of rituals because it helps you know who gets to hit the ball first. And what do you do when you're on the green and who, there's a whole lot of things that are unstated and it's bewildering. I remember the first time I joined a golf club and I turned up in my jeans and my sneakers and t-shirt and I just got these dirty looks from people who I just was unaware of the rituals. And sometimes coming into church can be a bit like that. Because every church has rituals. I don't know if you've grown up in a Baptist church, if you've been to an Anglican church, it can be bewildering. Because all of a sudden everybody just starts talking all at once. And they all know what they're saying. And you're going, what's going on? And they're sitting and standing and moving. But it can be a bit like that for an Anglican coming to a Baptist church. Like every congregation has rituals. And most families have rituals around food. We kind of know. In different families, there's a standard grace that somebody says, or we all hold hands. It can be a bit bewildering if you're out at McDonald's with a family that hold hands for grace, and you go, "No, I hope no one sees me." There are different rituals, but it's important to understand the rituals. One of the real complications for us as a church that I love is we have a Nepalese congregation and they have completely different rituals for food. And one of the things we discovered about one of the reasons they find it hard to want to come to dinner together is they find it hard to come to someone's house and then they feel obligated to bring you back to their house, which may not be big enough to host your family. Does that make sense? And so there's these understandings that we completely miss. And it's easy to offend people if you don't understand rituals. A marriage is a ritual where two mothers-in-law come together. It's what it's all for. Or we've just said goodbye to Morris. And a funeral is, I wouldn't say it's helpful, but it's a way we know how to say goodbye to people. They are all rituals, and rituals are important. And you'll see in the Bible, there's often times where it talks about according to the custom. And some of that stuff is really hard for us to understand because we're not first century Jews, but they were rituals that were a normal part of first century Jewish life. And so it's actually really, if you're reading the Bible, it's actually important. You'll find that some things actually are much more symbolic than we think they are because we don't understand the rituals. Two other things. Pastimes. Pastimes are one of the major reasons eating dinner with people can not do much. Because pastimes are the kind of conversations that literally pass time, where you don't actually get to know anybody, where nobody discloses who they actually are and nobody feels seen. So it's quite possible to have a whole discussion about the football without telling anybody anything about you or about the weather. Or often it's not, pastimes in and of themselves are not wrong, but if they are the major way you relate to people, that's unhelpful. Sometimes pastimes are a way of just checking, like if you're talking about the weather or what, it's kind of like a way of putting down a plank and asking whether it's at a process level, whether it's okay to talk about more real things. So sometimes pastimes are kind of a feeling each other out to see how honest we want to be here. But I think it's interesting. I love hanging out with Gus and Mark and Harm for brekkie. And sometimes the conversations are just fantastic, but sometimes, if we're to be honest, they go round and round and round in circles. Not that that's bad, but sometimes we are passing time and not revealing things about each other. Does that make sense? The last one I want to talk briefly about, and again, this is stuff I've run whole seminars on over weeks, so we're just touching the surface on this. But we need to be honest. All of us, whether we're conscious of it or not, and mostly we're not, we play psychological games. Psychological games are a recurring set of transactions with a hidden motive and a predictable payoff. When it comes to eating a meal, sometimes meals can be a psychological game where somebody has their whole self-esteem tied up in people's response to the meal. And there's this kind of game where they're standing expectantly waiting for somebody to compliment them. Or else another kind of game around it can be if someone says, oh, it's not very good, what is actually happening is they are trying to manipulate you to say, yes, it is. And so can you see a psychological game is an indirect conversation where there is an emotional payoff. It always includes a hidden message, a repeating pattern, emotional manipulation, a predictable emotional ending, and both people end up feeling bad because we kind of know we've just played a game that and even the person who's tried to get the affirmation by playing that game knows they've only done it. We all do it, but we're just not even conscious of it. And there's some examples there. I'd love to have more time to unpack them, but one of the dangers can be in an unhealthy environment. The majority of communication is playing psychological games, where we and there's all kinds of. If you want to get into this, there's all kinds of books written about this stuff, but it's really important to begin to see in yourself where you avoid being honest and sort of take things sideways and look for an outcome. I'd love to have more time to talk about it, but there is a healthy alternative to playing psychological games, but there is a cost to it. In order to avoid playing psychological games, you need to say what you actually feel. You need to ask directly for what you need. You need to take responsibility for your own emotions. It is never true that somebody else made you feel something. It's important. And if you find yourself getting angry at me for saying that, tough. And if you find yourself getting more angry for me at saying that, that's part of the job of growing up is learning to own your emotional world. And finally, in order to avoid games, you need to be willing to hear the word no. Jesus was able to hear the word no. For the rich young ruler, he was okay with the rich young ruler saying no. And so Jesus never played psychological games, and we are called to face when we play psychological games and avoid the truth. Ephesians tells us, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, who is Christ. But that's a risky thing to do. It is a risky thing to do, and we live in a culture that doesn't train us to be honest with each other, which is part of why we are living in the most isolated culture in history. I love that Peter's call for our approach to evangelism is for us to live in such a way as people see our true motivations, and our true motivations are hopeful because we love Jesus. I'm going to invite the band to come up, and as we do, to invite everybody to come up and join them. And as they do, I'm just going to read this, not to join them on the stage, to join them and come and grab the cracker and the cup for communion. Good clarification. Thank you. Because how do we live the kind of lives that actually make a difference? How do we actually step into intimacy? Well, see, Jesus calls us to live lives that are typified by love. But he actually says that's only possible if you remain in his love. If it's about you working up enough courage to be honest, it's not going to work. But I'm just going to read this verse. And while I read, please start coming up and grabbing that now, grabbing the stuff for the communion, because I'm conscious of time. It's okay. I'll keep talking. and particularly for those online. But listen, as you come up, just quietly listen to these words. These are Jesus' words. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. This is Jesus kind of saying, I have called you to, I have shown you what it means to live a life of love. Just as I've kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you this so my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. Jesus spends a lot of time talking about what does it mean to remain in his love. Now he changes gears. Listen to this. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. This is one of the most confronting parts of the New Testament because we tend to want to think about Christianity being a solo thing. We want to think about it being my faith, my God, my Bible, my way. But you can't actually read the New Testament and believe that's what it teaches. Jesus says, I want you to live lives typified by intimacy, typified by seeing people and being seen by people, by loving people. Love each other as I've loved you. I do think there is a heresy in the modern church that says church is a service. Church was never meant to be a service. We're always meant to be a family. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. And then Jesus institutes this meal. He knows the natural tendency of human beings is to become self-centered. So he says, what I'm going to get you to do is regularly come back. I've shown you what love looks like. And the only way you're going to be able to live lives typified by healthy pulling back and spending time with God, by activities that are actually about making a difference in the world, and particularly intimacy, is if you know how much I love you. And so on the night he was betrayed, Jesus pulls up a cracker or a bit of flat bread and he says, this bread is my body. It's clear, it's obviously symbolic because he's actually standing there. It's not actually his body. But he says, I want you to remember who I am. I want you to remember what intimacy actually costs. I want you to remember the kind of life I'm calling you to, a life shaped like a cross. And I want you to remember where life is actually found. So just as the band are playing quietly, I just want to invite you to just take some time to thank Jesus for who he is and invite him to show you how much he loves you. Invite him to show you how much he loves you. And when you're ready, just take the cracker and eat. one of the other things that often gets a bit overlooked when Paul communicates to the Corinthians about communion. He says, one of the mistakes you guys make about communion is you come and think it's about you. His words are, if you take communion without bringing to mind the body of Christ, his words are, you're drinking judgment on yourself. It's pretty full on. The heart is, Jesus' heart for us is that we are to live in community. We are to live the kind of lives where people see who we actually are, and as they see us, they will realize we have hope because we have him. So I'm going to pray, and let's drink this cup together as a symbol of being part of one body held together by his love. Let's pray. Jesus, we are conscious we fall so far short. We are conscious we so quickly fall into the trap of becoming self-focused. Help us lift our eyes to your cross and know where hope actually comes from. And help us lift our eyes to each other and know we are not called to be alone. We are called to be part of your body. Save us from the psychological games that mean we never actually get to meet people. Save us from living from past times. Help us have more and more experiences of genuine intimacy. Help us be able to withdraw like you did and spend time with you and know your love. We acknowledge we've got a way to go. But as together we come and drink this cup together, we just say thank you that we don't have to have it together, but you invite us forward in your love. In your name, Jesus. So let's drink together. So just as we finish, eating with people is no guarantee of intimacy. But Jesus calls us to love each other and to face the stuff that holds us back from intimacy, from real relationship. So I want to challenge you this week just to bring to mind someone you might share a meal with and have a crack at being honest with.